Okay. So the prayer we just did is called the Foundation of All Good Qualities, and it was written by Lama Tsongkhapa in the 14th century. And it's what's called a Lam Rim prayer. And a Lam Rim prayer is really helpful for reviewing and reflecting on the whole path to enlightenment in a quick way. And so I'm guessing that for most of you, only a few of those verses made sense, and then as we got further and further into the prayer, less and less of it made sense. Yeah? But the first few kind of verses, you were like, yep, I'm with you, yep, impermanence, right? Was that some of your experience? And then as you went further into the prayer, you're like, who is this Vajradhara? What are these 4 sessions? And it became more vague, right? So by the end of discovering Buddhism, hopefully all of the verses will be clear. But it's really helpful to say them just to kind of get yourself acquainted with the process and the steps to the path to enlightenment. So it doesn't have to be this Lam Rim prayer, but any Lam Rim prayer is going to help refresh your knowledge and reconnect you with what you've already learned. So because this module of Discovering Buddhism, we're talking about establishing a daily practice, your personal daily practice. We want to start looking at what are the ingredients that you want to bring home to your own cushion. So again, it's your choice what you decide to bring to your daily practice, but also we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? We might as well use the structures that have been established for hundreds, thousands of years, because it's a bit more efficient than trying to make it up as you go. So anyway, one option to bring to your cushion is this Foundation of All Good Qualities prayer. And you can find this online quite easily. You Google search the title, all sorts of things will come up. And the benefit also is that you remind yourself of your own wisdom. Yeah, a lot of you have been to countless Dharma classes, right? You've been to a million public talks, but what happened in those public talks and where it lives in the broad context of the whole path, sometimes you forget, right? What goes first, what comes second, where does it live in terms of motivation and practice? And so when you recite a prayer like this, it organizes your thoughts. Yeah, it's really useful in that way. And it brings up all of the little insights you had during your, countless public talks that you've been to. Yeah, so that's one way to work with prayers like this. So they're not prayers asking to be saved, right? They're prayers to remind yourself of what you've already touched. Does that make sense? Yep, okay. So during this module, I'm going to do a slightly different style. And there's going to be a bit more practice together as a group. So we're going to do some Vajrasattva practice together today. And in subsequent days during this topic, I'll make time to see absolutely everyone who wants to see me about their own personal practice. So normally I just meet with the people who are doing Discovering Buddhism and doing the exam and doing the full-fledged whole thing. And I know that some of you aren't in the mood for exams and for qualifications. That's not your style. And so you don't get to meet one-on-one. But for this particular module, regardless of how you're approaching the content, if you want to meet and talk about your practice, we're going to build in some session times. Not today, but in subsequent days. And you'll be able to sign up. So anyway, it's totally optional, but just so you know, if you want to talk about your own practice, there's an opportunity for that. Right? Okay, so when we do a daily practice and when we have a spiritual practice in general, the pieces we want in place are called the 5 powers. Can everyone see the 5 powers over my head, or am I blocking the 5 powers? You can see the first list? Yeah? Okay. So these 5 powers, this is a structure that you bring to your cushion. It's a structure you bring to your life. And it's a structure you use at death, right? So this is a very handy list to have in your head of what are the components of a spiritual practice, right? So these 5 powers, they're a way of checking, is all of the pieces in my practice complete in terms of a practice that's going to lead me to enlightenment, right? If you want your practice to lead you to relaxation, you don't need the 5 powers. right? But if you want your practice to lead you to enlightenment, you need the 5 powers in place, and you might wind up being relaxed also, right, as a byproduct afterwards. So remember what we talk about with motivation. If you motivate for a small amount, you achieve a small amount. If you motivate for a large amount, you achieve a large amount, and all those small goals also, right? So we want to always, from the outset, stretch our mind to the most vast motivation, even if what we're just trying to accomplish is being calm during a family dinner, right? But being calm for a family dinner with the motivation, may I be enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, makes that into a spiritual practice. Saying I want to be nice because it's nice to be nice is nice, right? But it sort of then lives there on that basic level and carries some momentum but not the same power. What it looks like when you're actually in your day-to-day life might not look different. It's all about the mentality. Okay? So the first of the 5 powers is the power of determination. And the power of determination is all about motivation, all about setting your intention. So we're first going to talk about the 5 powers in the context of the meditation session. Later I'm going to talk about it in terms of daily life and at death. Okay, so right now, just kind of organize your thoughts. We're talking about cushion time. Okay, so you get to your cushion. What needs to happen before you get to your cushion? Those of you that did Discovering Buddhism, how to meditate, what happens before you sit down? What are pieces? There's some hints up there. You can cheat. Study is really important. Yeah, what else?
You fine-tune what you want to get from the meditation.
Yeah, you're organized with what am I doing, right? Yeah. What are the sort of physical bits and pieces to be organized with? Arranging the room. Yes. Silence. Theoretically. Right. Yes. Yes.
Silent environment.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Silent, neat, clean.
Silent, neat, and clean.
An altar.
Exactly. What do you want on your altar? You can but you have to say it out loud so I know. What do you need on your altar?
What do you do on your altar? Buddha?
On Buddha?
Stupa?
Mm-hmm.
The text?
What do they represent?
Buddha,
Very nice. Very nice. Yep. So you need a representation of what you want to achieve. Right? You want a representation of what you want to achieve. Can you meditate without an altar? Of course you can meditate without an altar. Do you need physical iconography? No, you don't need physical iconography. But the more senses, sound, smell, taste, touch, the more senses we can engage in our practice, the richer our practice becomes and the deeper it becomes. So if you think of your main troubles in life and your main distractions in life, most of them are through your senses, aren't they? Through eyes, through ears, through nose, etc. So if you start to change the way you use your sensory experience for the spiritual path, it has this very deep effect. So you don't have to have an altar, or your altar doesn't have to look like a traditional Buddhist altar, but doing something tactile and seeing something visual helps. Does that logic make sense to you, like why you would do it? Right, we're not trying to placate an angry God so that it will help us, right? No, that's not at all what Buddhism's about, right? And, I probably say this in some point every single class, and still every single class there's someone who worries that we're worshiping false idols, right? And we're not, and there is no golden calf, and there is none of that happening, okay? So when Buddhists have representations of what they aspire to be, it's to make your mind happy, right? You see them and you go, that's going to be me. Yeah, that Buddha statue, that form, that's going to be my form. That text, the knowledge within that text is going to be the knowledge I will have and the knowledge I will speak. That stupa, that's going to represent the wisdom, the mind of the enlightened being that I'm going to achieve. So, it makes your mind happy to see them. And also it makes your mind happy because it reminds you of your teachers who make you happy, right? Like you see the altar and you think immediately all of the things you like about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? It should remind you of that, right? the personalities that you've engaged with that represent the spiritual path for you. It doesn't have to be His Holiness, but he's the easiest, right? So you see the Buddha statue, you see the text, you see the stupa, and you think, that's the guru. All of that is embodying guru-ness, one in nature, right? Inseparable. And so don't let it be ordinary, right? I've seen some cute altars out and about at people's houses, that are a mixed bag of, I'm thinking of one friend who is like St. Francis of Assisi and like Spider-Man, and then like, right, there's like a whole mishmash of icons that for her uplift the mind. Now, if you're a card-carrying, strictly speaking Buddhist, perhaps like tidy up the chaos a little bit. But the concept is sound. It's things that make her mind happy and receptive. She walks by it and it reminds her of her spiritual path. So, yours should have something that uplifts the mind. In addition to, if you're a Buddhist statue, a text, and a stupa, what are other things you might put on the altar? Flowers. Beautiful offerings, right? Beautiful offerings. What else? Candles. Yep. All the beautiful things. Do the Buddhas need beautiful things? Okay, just checking. Right? They're fine. Okay. What in terms of images? What other images might you put on the altar? Buddhas? Gurus. Gurus, right? Guru pictures, right? The living Buddhas. Buddha Shakyamuni was incredibly kind in that he revealed the Dharma and taught the Dharma, and it lasts, and we're incredibly grateful. But how did we access his teachings? He's not here right now in physical form in an obvious way. How did we access what he had to say? How did we access the wisdom that he revealed? It was through our teachers, right? Not me, right? But like the big ones on the big chair. And so if you think about like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that's how a lot of us accessed the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. So that living representation, you see his face, it makes you happy, right? Makes you happy. He doesn't need you to have his picture. Yeah, he's not like our Guruji, right? He doesn't need us to have a picture of him. We like to have a picture of him. So you could also have, if your grandmother was a profound spiritual being, you could have a picture of your grandmother there too, right? It doesn't have to be all sort of fancy and Buddhist, but it should be something more than ordinary. It should be a person that you don't think of as ordinary. So if your grandma was an amazing person, but still just a regular person, you can put her next to the altar to make your mind happy. But unless you really think she was some sort of bodhisattva, make that differentiation in your mind. So how does that sit with you, that basic concept? What kind of ideas or responses come up if I say, make an altar, put these things on it? Good idea, bad idea, weird?
I have a technical question. If the altar, when it's ready, and it's in one of the rooms of the house, is it okay to leave it there in the open? Do we behave differently when we enter the room, or how is it done?
Yeah, logistics. Yeah, altar placement logistics. I'm going to hold that question and totally come back to that. Yep. Just the concept. Let's workshop the concept of having an altar. I'm really curious how you respond to this whole idea. Do you want one or not? Is it a good idea or not? Why not? Yeah.
Question. Usually, when you meditate, you put cards in front of the senses. And what you say is slightly different. That you have smell. So you just by that move the senses to a certain direction.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yep. You're making them work for you instead of working against you. Yep. You're making your senses work for you instead of your senses work against you. Yeah. So some of you were shaking your heads about the idea of an altar. Do you feel comfortable sharing where your resistance is? Yeah.
I think I already talked about it. I have a strong resistance against an altar because I'm still believing that being monolith is the best way.
Ah. Oh, fair enough. Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, rock
I have
on.
a conflict about it.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you say that I could put my grandmother's picture. But to be honest, when I practice the Tara Sangha, so I do have, because Tara is very meaningful to me, I do have a small icon of Tara, which...
This is interesting.
אני לא יודעת, sorry. It was so for me.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe a postcard, but not hanging,
No, it doesn't have to get crazy, right? Yeah, it doesn't have to get... I mean, like, I don't have any tankas myself, right? I'm a nun, right? I'm a professional. I don't have any, right? You know, like this, but I think the Gompa should have one, right? I think the meditation room should have one, because we're doing special work here, isn't it? But in my house, you know, I have like a little A4 piece of paper with everybody on there, nice and laminated, travel altar, right? Little Buddha, you know. Done, right? Altar to go, right? 'Cause, yeah, right? Exactly. You know, it's about the function of it, right? What's in it is different than the function of it should be to uplift the mind, to remind you of your path. And for a Buddhist, it should have certain components, because those certain components represent certain things, but they could be very wee, right? They could just be tiny, right? Especially if you travel a lot like I do, right? Or if you have a mixed family situation and you're going to annoy your family, you could have a tiny one, right? Just in a little box, right? Put a little cloth over it. Yeah.
This is very interesting because I was thinking about my room and what I saw that gradually and actually over the years, I have a place where I have a lot of Buddhas. So I think
It's happened organically.
better, naturally.
Yeah. Yeah, if you stay still too long, they'll accumulate. Yeah, and just naturally, right? Like you go to some Buddhist event. Yeah, people give you presents, yeah. For Christmas, right? For Hanukkah, right? Here's a Buddha. My Buddha that I've had for 20 years, my mother gave to me for Christmas. Right? The irony, right? Right. Yeah, right. Very supportive. So you know, so these representations that are beautifully made and have beautiful cloths around them, you know, that's optional. And also, it's dangerous, right? Because you can start to think of it as art, right? If you start to think of it as pretty art to have in your house to show off your exoticness, right? To show all your friends how exotic you are. Dodgy, right? Totally dodgy, right? But, you know, if you want to think, haha, I will stealthily imprint my friends with Buddha images by putting them everywhere, I don't know, maybe there's an argument to be made, right? Yeah.
Hi, I have the disadvantage that this is my first module that I'm coming to, and there's a lot of teachings that maybe have to be the focus in order to raise what I want to raise. But I wanted to say two things. First of all, I think I don't necessarily, it's helpful to have the explanations because my first reaction is probably the standard one of what's going on here. I don't think I understand the necessity for the offerings, because that begins to start to feel like, you know, worship, ceremonial, whatever, and who needs these offerings anyway? And certainly when you're talking about food, and there's, from the little bit, I didn't manage to read the entire required reading, but there was, you know, the whole explanation, you have to take them at the end of the day, and you have to wipe them, put them stack, and, you know, and all this sort of thing, and, you know, one gets very caught up with that, and then that becomes some sort of dictate, and has additional powers that seep under your skin, I feel, or can have that tendency. But also it's surprising to me, since, again, and only in the beginning section of the required reading, because unfortunately I didn't manage to get through enough of it, I was kind of struck by the extreme position of, you know, that you have to be able to be willing to have such non-attachment to your body that anybody else could inflict pain and destruction on you, and that would be fine with you.
Hardcore,
which to me seems mildly outrageous, but I'll put it on the side. But then, to that extent, why be busy with other physical, tactile issues? It seems to contradict.
Indeed, and it should seem to contradict. And the fact that you see the seeming contradiction means you're thinking deeply about the material, which we say, yay, right? Like doubt is the access to wisdom, right? So you need to go, why? That's dumb. What? And then go deeper, right? So this initial path of that seems like nonsense, long as it seems like nonsense for now, and you keep the question kind of open and curious, right? Like, why do they do that? These Buddhist people should seem, you know, hopefully like relatively reasonable, logic-based people, why do they do this weird stuff, right? They seem relatively sane, as sane as anyone, right? I'm hoping, right? So, why would they do this thing that seems so odd, that seems so ritualistic, that seems like you have to, that seems, tight in some way? Keeping the openness that goes, I'm guessing there's more to the story, because these people doing it seem like reasonable people. There must be more reasons than just the surface, right? So if we can keep that openness, so first of all, offerings. Offerings are in order to create the cause for resources in the future. Now, in the future. Yep, resources in the future. Why do we have poverty? Because of previous miserliness, greed in previous lives, etc., etc. Why do we have not enough resources? Also because we're tight and don't share the resources we have. There are many reasons why we don't get the material support we want. Also, what we want might be excessive, right? So there's many ways to look at an idea of what are resources and what resources are necessary. Now, when you're doing an offering, what you're doing is you're offering things that are pleasing to your senses in order to disengage from your attachment to them, right? So we need water, right? Water is important. Everyone needs water. Offering water is offering something very precious, right? So it's a good offering because it's something very precious. Offering food is important, right? We need food. So we're offering things that are important to us, in one way creating the cause for resources in the future, in one way showing to our own mind that we value the spiritual path, right? Now, the embodiment of the spiritual path, the Buddhas, etc., the enlightened beings, they will help whether or not we make offerings. They don't care, right? They will help the worst serial killer on earth try to perfect their mind to enlightenment, right? The nature of an enlightened being is to not be biased, to not have partiality, to not respond to bribes, right? You cannot bribe the Buddhas into helping you with 1,000,000 offerings, right? But we make offerings to them because of what they represent to us. So do you see there's this one level creating the cause for resources. There's this one level overcoming our greediness, overcoming our miserliness. There's this other level which is showing something and giving something valuable to something we perceive as valuable. Because as soon as you show respect to something, you become more receptive to it, right? And we want to be more receptive to the spiritual path, right? That's where we want wisdom to go in. We want to understand these things deeply. We want them to touch our heart. And so by making a little bit of a song and dance, a bit of a, hoopla around the whole altar thing, it's saying to your mind, what I do here is important. Pay attention, right? What I do on this cushion is important, right? It's important for my own peace, my own development. It's also important for the work I want to do in the world, right? When you're working on yourself, you're necessarily bringing a better self to the people you interact with, right? Do you think your friends like you when you're stressed out? Is that like their favorite version of you, right? They say, I like it when you're calm and happy, but could you bring all of your anger to dinner tonight? Bring all of your anger and resentment, please, right? They're not going to do that, right? They say, bring some nice salad, but don't bring your anger, right? So really what we're looking at is how to make something important, to remind ourselves of what already is important. And by having tactile, physical things to anchor us, it can help retrain the brain. Yeah, it can help retrain the mind. So we've talked a bit in the past about the representations of all the various offerings, but just the idea of, say you have the simplest altar, right? Say you have just like a little Om, right? And you offer it a little flower, right? That can still have a profound meaning if you bring meaning to it, right? The little Om represents for you the enlightened body, speech, and mind. The little flower is a beautiful flower that's your own flower. Don't take your neighbor's flower, right? Your own flower. And you offer it carefully with a very engaged and focused mind. it's reminding you that you value your own practice. It's reminding you that you value your own practice. It connects you back to it. Yeah. And if you think of yourself during the day in a really stressed day, but a stressed day where you're consciously trying to remember your spiritual path, you know, sometimes it's a word, sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's a phrase, but when we can reconnect to our spiritual path, it's like we unhook from the negative behaviors that got us so stressed out, right? Even just like one mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, you know, it makes you remember compassion and wisdom, right? If you're getting worked up in a staff meeting because the new person is trying to take over and they don't understand how things are done here, right? And they're trying to inject their new ideas, right? And the rest of the staff is getting humph. How dare you, right? Don't you know how things are done? You can feel the tension happening in the meeting. And you can feel yourself wanting to say something out of anger. If you remember your spiritual path for a second, you unhook from the anger and you ask yourself, what is the most effective thing in this context? And then you speak from wisdom rather than speaking from anger, right? So the work we do with the altar should be at the beginning of the day as part of like a launch sequence for our day, right? It's getting our mind oriented to our spiritual path. So the more kind of time, effort, energy, thought we bring to it, the more power it will have to bleed through into the whole day. Do you know what I mean? So if you kind of rush through the preliminaries and just kind of sit, watch your breath for 10 minutes, rush off again, you know, it doesn't have the same power as if you just looked at your altar for a second, gave a little sweep to the floor, you know, looked at your cushion, kind of made it a comfortable sacred space, did your prostrations, sat down, really thought of your motivation, really engaged with what am I about? What are my core values? And then do your practice. That has much more lasting effect throughout the day. Yeah. I mean, does that make sense, that logic, or do you find some resistance there? No. You know, so these offerings are really to train your own mind, right? They're training your own mind. They're helping you become receptive, right? And what you actually offer, it should just be having some meaning for you, right? It should have some meaning for you. So when you do these offerings, you offer something physical, but then in your mind, you multiply it as many times as you can. So if you offer one tiny little flower, you can imagine in your mind now it multiplying, 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 filling all of space and offering that. That is a beautiful offering. That's good for merit and resources. That's good for connection to your refuge objects, but it's also good for your concentration, right? Stretching your mind to visualize more, to imagine more, is very good for making your mind flexible. So all of these practices have many levels of meaning. It's never just what it seems on the surface, right? Just like this is not art, right? Even though it looks artistic and there are pretty embellishments, every single piece has significance, right? Every angle, yeah, every line, every flower, there is a reason. Yeah, that's not art, right? It's to remind you of your spiritual path. It's to be like a mirror for you of that will be me. Yeah, that will be all of us. So Tibetan Buddhism is probably the most full-on about iconography, right? Other forms of Buddhism are simpler about it. Have you been to a nice Zen temple and it's all sort of black and gray and everyone's facing the wall and there's a lot less words and they might have just a wee Buddha and a wee candle and there it's done. Excellent, right? Excellent. We're really looking at how do we engage with whatever objects there are. If you think about Tibet, kind of barren, right, spacious, and then you go into a Tibetan Gompa, it is far more intense than these two little tankas, right? A Tibetan Gompa is like, yeah, a Tibetan camp exploded in there, right? There is no free space, right? Every piece of the wall is covered in something. Yeah, and if you're not used to it, you're like, oh, heavens, wow, okay, that's a lot of color, right? But the contrast of that overwhelming experience to the outside world, they don't have such a busy outside world experience, right? It's okay for them to engage with more and more and more detail because they have more space in their mind to engage with that. So even though we're Tibetan Buddhists, we adjust it to suit a Western culture by putting some space in the walls, right? We just have the 2 tankas, not 20, right? You know, so it's a way of adjusting culturally while still using the same ideas. Yeah. Yes.
I seem to find myself having a tendency to, like, when I meditate, my mind turns to the altar as an object of losing concentration.
Yeah, right.
You know that?
Yeah, yeah.
So how do you find a balance between fiddling too much with your altar and trying, and I go inside the meditation and I'm thinking, no, I should change the image, I should
Yeah,
swap
yeah.
these two, and maybe next time I'll put the incense on the other side. I find
Classic.
myself trying, it starts to be very unbeneficial.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you find a balance?
Face the
between
wall.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a normal thing, right? Like the mind wants to, it wants to run off of its practice, right? Like your deep conviction is, I want to transform, I want to be of benefit to all sentient beings, I want to develop positive states of mind. But then the surface reality, which is much sort of more familiar, is fill it up, busy, distraction, right? And so just like if you're meditating on compassion and all sorts of thoughts about patience come up to you, you say, okay, now's not the time to do the patience meditation. I decided to do the compassion meditation. Stay here, right? You have to be a little bit strong with yourself. Similarly, if your altar itself is the distraction, you say, all right, it's good as it's going to get today. Consciously disengage, right? Or consciously turn to one side in case it's distracting you, or close your eyes. To know that the reason that happens has very much to do with your mind a little bit scared of what's going to happen on the cushion. Yeah, it's a little bit scared of what it confronts to sit still and actually see the madness in your mind. So sometimes it's easier to lose yourself in what is controllable. Right, you can control where the incense goes, right, and that's secure feeling, and you know it should be grounding, but that very fact that it's grounding can then turn into its own obstacle because then you rely on it too much. So you're just checking in with, all right, it's as good as it's going to get today, and then you unhook and come back to what is my practice right now. Yeah. So just know it's normal, totally normal. Happens to everybody, and that the reason is not the altar. Right? It's never the altar, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You just have to remind yourself in more and more instances, because when we start to do these things as our daily life, they take on an ordinariness, and then we forget that the same traps apply as in other things, you know? So, all right. Doing. All right, so power of determination is setting your intention and your motivation. And this is the most important piece of any practice. Why are you doing it, right? This is the most important piece, okay? So why do you think we meditate? Why do we have a daily practice? What is the point, besides the quick version, to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings? Of course. Right? But how do you put that to yourself? How do you make that real and a living experience for yourself?
Need to be a better version of yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
To develop, to get a hold of, like, to be on top of things, not to.
Yeah, get swept up in old habits to be on top of stuff.
The repetitivity of
Yeah.
doing it again and again. This is what can bring you into doing to making the change.
Yep.
So it's not enough, as you said, just knowing. Oh, I know it, but now.
Yeah, exactly. You have to bring it back up.
Make it,
Bring it back up.
and then it's the cycle that you study, contemplate, meditate, and
Exactly.
then in meditation you find the gaps, and then you go back into the studying,
Yep.
and that's so. If you put it aside, which I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's not leaving it as mere words, but the mere words can help you, right? So it might be that every time you meditate, you say the same words. May I become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, right? I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? Whatever your favorite prayer version of that, it might be the same one every single time, but it has to talk to you, right? If it's so familiar that it loses meaning, you have to slow it down again, right? When it was brand new, it maybe had more meaning because you still had to remember it, right? Just the act of trying to remember it or reading it off a page made it a living, real experience for you. And then as you get used to it, you can kind of skim over the most important part to get to like the meat of the practice, right? And it's like, no, the most important part is refuge and bodhicitta. The rest of it is details, right? So, so if you're not anchored in that, why am I doing this, right, in a real living sense, remind yourself to. That's the most important piece. And if you can do nothing else in your daily practice but set your motivation at the beginning of the day, that still will lead to a very meaningful life, even if you never wind up on a cushion, you never wind up with an altar. Setting your motivation at the beginning of the day orients your day, right? You say, what is the purpose of my life? You wake up, your first thought, what is the purpose of my life? This is an important conversation in the morning, right? And the way you fill in the blank might be individual to your spiritual path, but you need to fill in that blank at some point, even if it's an evolving thing perhaps over time. But if you never orient yourself in that way, your whole life passes you by, right? And then you get to your deathbed and you think, what was the point of all that, right? And I've seen it again and again. Maybe you've seen it again and again. People that get to death and wonder, what was all that for? What was the point of all this? Yeah.
The thing about the Maya motivation, that it's a little bit overwhelming.
Whatever do you mean? No, I'm kidding. You're like, really, for all sentient beings? Really, all of them?
Yeah,
Till enlightenment?
Think about it in the beginning of the morning,
Yeah.
and it's like, am I qualified?
You're like, well, I'm not getting up now. Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like sometimes disencouraging because you think you sometimes do more harm than help.
Yeah.
So, I want to. But
Sure, yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where we get into this idea of you move through all the 5 powers and you realize that for ages, it's just an aspiration, right? It's an aspiration. It's something you want to do. But the actual doing of it has to evolve over time. But bringing the idea, think of it as an idea. If you keep bringing this idea back into your head, it becomes realer and realer for you and more enriching. And it can be a little bit disempowering or a little bit overwhelming, this idea, I'm going to become enlightened for all sentient beings, really? I can barely feed myself properly. What? Right? It can be really overwhelming unless you realize it's the idea I'm bringing to the ordinary things to help orient the life in a meaningful way. Yeah. So the details of your life don't have to change. You have the same job, you have the same friends, you have the same basic activities, but you're bringing altruism to it. It actually makes it less likely for you to make the mistakes that you're describing, right? If you think my purpose is to work for the welfare of sentient beings, then I can't react in the same way I always have reacted when people trigger anger in me. I have to react differently if this is my path. Yeah, if you've forgotten your motivation, you can just react your same old way. You can add to the aggression in the world and not worry about it. You can create a ripple effect of anxiety bouncing off of everyone else's anxiety for a whole anxiety circus, right? You can just keep being one more person like that, yeah? But as soon as you orient yourself of what is the point, then your old habits are called into question. You start asking them, wait, do you get to stay? And it might be you don't want them to stay, but you can't quite move through them yet. But just the idea of challenging them starts to ruin their momentum, right? Which is what we want, right? So I don't know, does that help?
The benefit of all sentient beings is different when you're Tibetan and different when you're Western. And
Is it?
it feels like when you're a monk, it's like when you see people like Tenzin Dzogchen, he's been working on it for all his life.
Yeah, I mean, it's more familiar for a Tibetan because they grew up with it, yeah.
He has been in this kind of environment that helped him to do it
Yeah.
without hurting himself.
Yeah,
Sometimes when you try to think about benefiting other people, you hurt yourself in the process because you don't know how to do it. You
Yeah.
hurt other people because you're not qualified enough.
exactly, which should be the very thing that brings you back to the cushion, right? You say to yourself, I want to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, because right now when I try to benefit sentient beings, I have no idea what helps,
Yeah.
right? I'm just making an educated guess. Yeah, here's your best friend going through an awful divorce. What do you say to them? You have a series of options of what might help, but you don't really know, right? You don't really know what's going to help soothe them, what's going to help them feel supported. You can just guess based on your life, and sometimes it works, and that's wonderful. But if you were a Buddha, you would know, right? And so that very fact of seeing your own incompleteness, in a way, can be the thing that gives you will. Yeah, you think, all right, this is why I practice. You meet your own gaps and you think, this is why I practice. Without a spiritual path, you meet your gaps and you think, this is why I'm bad, or this is why, I'm nothing, or this is why blah, blah, blah. Or you get defensive and you think, well, it's only fair that I don't have this because of blah, 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 right? When you have a spiritual path, you notice the gap and it gives you more courage. You think, they really deserve the best of me. I deserve the best of me. I need to keep working. Yeah, so noticing where you have no idea what to do shouldn't bring you down, it should bring you up. You think, this is why I practice. And also it can help you stop being a fixer. Yeah, someone who's always up in everybody's business trying to sort things out and fix it. Actually, you do as much harm as good. Maybe it's better you come back to your cushion and spend more time there. Because then the actions you decide to make have more wisdom with them, right? Do fewer things with more impact, right? Instead of being all fixing, who needs food, who needs a hug, who needs this, who needs that, usually filled with all sorts of, please like me, yeah, together with it, right? Instead of getting all like that, and we all get like that, we could do fewer things with more impact if we practice, right? So in a way, it's a relief, right? You don't have to go and solve everyone's relationship issue. You don't have to fix everyone's job problems, right? You don't have to end the war by yourself alone. You just need to work on your inner war, right? And your inner anger, and your inner conflict, and your inner outlying territories that have been occupied in tricky ways, right? You're working on your inner Donald Trump, right? Yeah? That's what you're working on, right? We all have a secret Donald Trump inside of us. And if we can start to communicate with him to bring out some wisdom, what epic work would that be, right? And so that if we actually do something in the physical world, it's not going to be all tangled with our negative emotions. It's going to be directly fed by our wisdom. Yeah, so it's doing less in the outside world with more impact because of the work you do on your cushion and the work you do in class. Takes the pressure off, right? How tired are we trying to fix everything? Just get back to your cushion. Then your priorities become clearer. It doesn't mean that you don't act, it means that you act differently. Do you know what I mean, right? Like, when you've gotten lost in trying to be a part of every single cause and gotten lost in trying to be a part of every single person's life and trying to just fix and fix and fix, so tiring, right? But if you can just work on finding peace and resiliency in your own mind, you communicate that non-verbally with whatever group of people you happen to be with, right? You bring that out of people, yeah? You start to help them lift just by the power of what you've done with yourself internally. So this is why we do a spiritual practice, and why we do it every day is the repetition makes it easier, right? Simple as that. It's not because good people do this and bad people don't. It's not silly and superficial like that, right? It's that repetition makes things easy, yeah? And then just naturally in your daily life, your practice occurs to you, yeah? In the middle of an argument, in the middle of a traffic jam. It occurs to you naturally because it's so familiar. So we have to take all of this nonsense about I am good when, I am bad when, right? It's just too simple, right? It's effective when, less effective when, right? I'm more effective when I organize my thoughts in this way. I'm less effective when I'm distracted, right? Yeah, does it help to frame it in terms of effectiveness, not goodness, but effectiveness? Effectiveness in this world, what impact do you want to bring? Yeah, do you have questions about that? So then back to practicalities, something nice and easy and tangible, right? So if you've got your Tal's question of, do you have your altar out in a public space? If it has public worthy images, right? If it has images that shouldn't be seen in public, don't put it in public, right? So if you are a practitioner of highest yoga tantra, don't put highest yoga tantra images out in public, including mandalas, yeah? But if it's Shakyamuni Buddha, yeah, the important thing is to not make it ordinary and to not make it art, right? This is something sacred, right? If I have them all over my house because I love them and they make my mind happy, that's okay, but just make sure you haven't fallen into it's just pretty art to show off to my friends. Yeah, make sure you don't fall into that. That's really common, yeah.
It's also when you live in a society, Buddhism seems to be like cult.
Oh, culty, yes,
Yeah.
right.
So I think you bring a lot of
Friction.
Yeah, you want to be skillful, right?
Then you could, if you do care about other people, so why put it out?
Yeah, exactly, it might
Obviously,
trigger
people
them.
will come in and will start arguing, and they will feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
I'm better than us. That, and then
Yeah.
then it goes into all those things that.
Yeah, you know your friends and your family, if it's going to annoy them. Yeah.
And also,
Yeah.
I think in the country we live in, religion is something that is your force.
Yeah.
And there is something in there that I think many people that are secular,
Mm-hmm.
I'll speak for myself, of course, it feels a little bit, it doesn't mean that you're honest. I mean, the fact that you're very religious Jew,
Yeah.
wear these clothes, many times we know that their behavior is not
Yeah,
very,
absolutely.
very ethical. So this, for me, all this altar and putting it out and people seeing it, it's something that, okay, if I'm a good Buddhist,
Yeah.
it means that, as you said, that I have the motivation in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and I try to study as much as I can,
Yeah.
and I try to do as much good as I can, and many times I do bad things, and that's good enough. Why do I have to?
You don't have to.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, for the.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so what we want to look at,
Buddhists
right?
want us to be good people. If they are Buddhists, they want us to be good people and to do good things. I mean, what do they?
Yeah, of course. So really just like manage your reactivity, right? That the way it looks, there's the way it traditionally looks, and then there is your personal application of that is based in skillful means and common sense, right? So I'm explaining here is the traditional, fully fledged form, and then at your own house, you figure out what would that look like for me in a way that's practical and does the job. The job is to connect you with your motivation, so you pick the things that do that job for you. And for some people, having very visible iconography helps. You know how learning styles are different. Some people are very visual, some people are very auditory, some people are very tactile, so we don't want to be judgmental either about the style practice takes, right? And I completely agree with you that the form of a religious person with a religious house with religious iconography often means that person is actually full of it, right? And often means that person has all sorts of hypocrisy and tightness and us and them thinking, but we don't have to be like that, right? Right? So just because that's the way it often turns out doesn't mean it has to turn out that way for us personally. And this whole module is about for you personally.
The question is,
Yeah?
I'm asking also is, I mean, when I see, altars, I'm fine with it. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
It's totally, look at this, it's fine.
Mm.
The question is, what am I being expected as part of the community?
Yeah.
If I'm not having an altar, I'm not a good.
No, who's telling you
Buddhist.
this,
I mean,
right?
I don't,
Who says
I don't
this?
have these things and I
Stop,
don't have
stop,
the flowers.
stop.
I
Who
don't-
is telling you that?
I think
Who is
who's
telling you that?
is all
right?
And all the things that, once,
Yeah.
I don't remember, it was big picture that was here.
Yeah.
And the Alton
Yeah.
was full with chocolate, so expensive.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I was like, oh my God. And it was huge. So
Yeah.
I was saying to myself, so that's what's being expected
No.
of.
That's
Because
but
there's
here
so
that
much
that's
depth
but
about
here
it.
here that this is your association, right? Right, and I completely understand, right? And I remember hearing about this Maitreya project where they want to build this, 5 stories, 8 stories high Buddha statue, all gold and shiny. I remember first hearing about that and thinking, what a waste of money. They should just feed the poor people of that area, right? The classic thoughts, right? And then I realized that underneath that was the idea that this will make people's minds remember the spiritual path and be a tourist attraction that will help the general economy and feed people for years and years and years. And it's actually very, very strategic on multi-levels, right? So, but this is the thing, is that we have to make sure we keep going, what would be the deeper reason for that? Because on the surface, that seems very materialistic. On the surface, that seems the opposite of Buddhism. That's so confusing, right? Why all these chocolates? Why all this gold, right? So to ask, is there a contradiction, or am I actually missing part of the story, right? And so so just having the gentleness with the question that assumes there is more to the story, right? There is always more to the story. And layers upon layers upon layers of meaning. Why chocolate? Because we love chocolate, right? Chocolate triggers attachment in a very coarse, direct way for many people, right? Tibetans don't really use chocolate that often because they don't like chocolate. They use other things, right? So what we're using is something that for us is difficult not to have attachment towards. Making an offering of something like that is very helpful for the mind. So you could offer, like beautiful organic veggies, right? Because you think, oh, that's healthy, that's a good offering, but you probably have a different association with beautiful organic veggies than you do with like the most delicious chocolate. So, right, but my point is, right, is what does it represent? Like, don't get lost in the form, right? Don't think like, what is this representing, right? And that there would be a really direct meaning. And if it doesn't work for you, think of what would work for you to get to that same level, right? So if you don't love chocolate, right, use something else. But nothing is being expected of you. No one is watching, right? No one is watching your practice. It's your practice. It's personal, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, use ice cream, right? But so this is my point, is that if you feel pressure to, if I want to belong to this religion, it has to look this way, please don't feel that that pressure is actually coming from the people or the representatives of that tradition. It's coming from you, right? You can be a totally secret Buddhist with no altar, totally normal clothes, and have the best practice of anyone, right? But these forms help, right? So we're talking about why, but you don't have to. Do what you like. I'm not going to go to your house and check, right? Oh, your altar. Oh, no, it's in the wrong place, right? Oh, you're not dusting it. That Buddha's too small. Like, no one's coming to your house to check. No one cares, right? It's about what it does for your mind. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, but I don't want to spend the hour on this.
Right, so I feel like sometimes we hear the universal teaching as somehow you have to. What you're trying to do is, what would that look like for me? Yeah? So in some people's house, having a public altar is not going to annoy their friends and family. They'll think, oh yeah, you're weird like that. I know. That's cool. And for some people, their friends and family will say, oh my gosh, what is wrong with you? You've joined a cult. Yeah, so for those people, put your altar somewhere quiet, right? It's skillful, right? It's practical. So Dharma never goes against common sense. It makes your common sense stronger, right? And so if you think, oh, I have to have an altar, but my husband will hate me if I do, divorce or Buddhism, right? Like, don't like put yourself into that place. Say, all right, I'll have a secret quiet altar in my heart that no one sees. Yeah, fine, right? Happy marriage, happy practice, done, right? Like, don't get weird, right? Yeah, it should make you happy is the point. It should make you happy. So this topic is establishing a daily practice from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, right? In the organization FPMT, right? It's very specific. It's not the only way, right? There are many correct ways. So if you understand our correct way, then you can put it through your own filters and see what it will look like for you. Is that all right? You're with me? And remember that you can be coming to Buddhist stuff forever and never become a Buddhist, right? You don't have to even be a Buddhist. You can come, we don't care. We maybe even say, don't be a Buddhist. It's a lot of work to be a Buddhist. Just come to stuff, don't be a Buddhist, right? It's a lot of work to be a Buddhist. It's fun work for those of us who like it, but for a lot of people, just bits and pieces are gonna work for them. So take those bits and pieces that work for you, and the rest of it, you think, oh, it's interesting that they do that. I'm glad I understand now why they do that. I'm not gonna do that. That's fine, right? Do you understand? We're not like that kind of religion, right? Right? Like, it's none of my business what you do on your altar. I'm just saying, here's the way we do it, and why. So long as it's clear why we do it, that's what I want to make sure is clear for you guys. Why do we do it? Then you choose. Yeah, then you choose. Yeah. Did I miss any questions? Any logistical questions that answer your question, Tal?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So different logistics.
Yes.
What do you do if you don't have any room in your home?
Indeed, what if you don't have any room in your house? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
In your heart.
In your heart. Yeah, I mean, look, I really do have a tiny wee travel altar. It's just little. It goes, can go on your bedside table. Yeah, just, buy your lamp on your bedside table instead of your iPad, right?
You can do an application of building an altar in your home.
Yeah, you could have it on your little tablet. You don't need to have one, but if you want to, just little.
What you're supposed to do meditation, it should be like someplace where you can meditate in front of it, right?
Yeah, it helps. So you could even have it on your tablet and you just set it up during your meditation, right? And then put it back. Yep, you're a millennial, you know how. right, so you just have your little and we're good, right? Yeah, totally. And it's sort of fun, right? It's kind of fun to do that electronically, right? So you go online and you find your favorite version of the images, right? And get it all gorgeous and do a whole graphic design project. Your favorite picture of His Holiness, smiley right there. It's all. Oh, it could be fun, right? Now I'm inspired. I feel like I should do one now. Right? So a little digital altar, yeah. And then also no one sees it. Totally secret, yeah. Stealth Buddhist, right? Totally stealth. Which is probably more useful in the long run to be a stealth Buddhist. If you start telling people that you're a Buddhist, they might start checking that you're behaving the way they think Buddhists should act, and they'll start sort of getting judgmental and being like, you're a Buddhist, you're not supposed to get angry, right? So sometimes it's nice to be a stealth Buddhist.
They don't know really what it is, so
Right. I mean, but I've gone into organizations where people have said, started defending their drinking habits just because I walked in. I don't care that they're drinking a beer, but they're like, oh, I'm just having one. This is only my first one. I'm like, I don't care. Right? So sometimes it's nice to be a quiet Buddhist because people sometimes don't understand, right? But like this. Okay, so we know the first power. Yes, you're clear on the first power? Yeah, okay. Yes?
Just because we are talking about basic,
Yes.
I would like to have my basics really.
Yes. Yofi?
Could you give us later a sort of which prayers and which things you recite during each part and each power and each thing?
Yes. See the table to my left.
I
Yes.
know I have books.
Yeah.
But the list of what is the basic,
Yeah.
what is enlarged, what is more extensive.
Yeah. Yes, we will. We will do. We will. And know that there's things that are universal to all Tibetan Buddhists. You always motivate, you always dedicate, but what goes in the middle actually is quite individual, right? So we'll go through different options, but it's quite individual. And I'll come back to some of your questions about giving up the body and all of this, may sentient beings play with my body, even if they kill me, all of these really full on, what? We will come to that in the next session because we're going to look at Lama Zopa Rinpoche's daily practice that he's compiled. So anyway, that's the next session. So have a nice cup of tea and grab a copy of this Transforming a Suffering Life into a Happy Life. And that's what we're talking about next.